Hi, I'm Cedar Lewis and I was curator of the street art exhibition at Tate Modern, and I'm going to give you a little bit of information about the works. Obviously there's lots of debate and issues which this project raised around the subject of street art, and are the works still street art if they're in a museum or on the front of a museum, and all that kind of stuff. I don't think we were really trying to claim the authenticity of these works as kind of street art in the street. I think for me at least, the actual reason of calling the show street art was more a way of titling the movement, because there are so many there are so many titles or names for street art that float around. I think people can be a little bit confused about what actually to call it, and I think so just by calling it the exhibition street art, somehow that term seems to have filtered down into popular consciousness a little bit, and I think that's what the artists seem to prefer that term. And so if this exhibition's had some small influence. This is the work by 6A Art, who's a young artist from Barcelona. Basically what it depicts is an animal. 6A is well known for kind of depicting these fictional animal creatures. It's like a kind of cat or a bear. And what I like about 6A's work is that the work really seems to reflect Barcelona. 6A's work has this kind of pop surrealism aesthetic about it, referencing people like Miro, maybe even Gaudi. And so I like the fact that you can locate the art, even though it's displayed in London, it still looks like a artwork from Barcelona. 6A's piece was basically made with spray paint directly onto the building. The colours are very bright because he did a white underbase first and then painted colours on top, so it was interesting to watch him work. He had quite a kind of rock and roll style, let's say, of painting. Got into trouble a few times for leaning a bit too far out of the cherry picker, but that was just the nature of the Okay, so here we see the piece by JR from Paris. This work it's a paste up, so it's made of paper, and you can see from this image that it's actually peeling off a little bit on this image. The work actually peeled off quite substantially during the course of the exhibition and was repasted a couple of times. And I suppose that is kind of part of the contradictions of this project, the fact that we were fixing these works because they were in a museum context. If they were just on the street in the kind of natural environment, usually what JR would do would just paste it up and leave it to decay and fall apart, and that would be it. But obviously we were using these works in a kind of more traditional exhibition format, and so we took the decision to repair them when they were damaged. But actually I think I, and certainly a lot of the audience, quite liked seeing the work decay in that way. But in terms of the image, obviously it's depicting this black man holding what at first appearance looks to be like a gun, but actually when you look closer it's actually a video camera. So it was quite a controversial piece. It was very prominently placed. So this was the piece that you saw when you were walking over the Millennium Bridge. It was really very confrontational and a little bit controversial. But what actually JR I think is doing is trying to subvert the stereotypes that we're fed, and saying actually this isn't a cliche of a violent black man. It's actually more likely a video director or a filmmaker or a creative person. So it kind of confronts your So this is the work by the artists called Os Gêmeos, who are twin brothers, and Os Gêmeos in Portuguese or Brazilian means the brothers. The work depicts this giant, as they call it, the figures, they call these large figures giants when they paint them. So it's one of their giants, and obviously he's naked other than his head covering, The way I see this image is it's almost the kind of reverse of normality, where normally our heads are exposed but our bodies are covered. And the other thing to point out is that the figure is holding in his hand a load of CCTV surveillance cameras, which kind of appear to have been plucked from the wall. So what we're getting in this work or this image is that very much, I think, a kind of a Brazilian visiting London's view of London, which is a kind of very different perspective than we might get from a UK-based artist. The Osgemios came to London and were very struck by the amount of video cameras that they saw everywhere, and so the work was a kind of comment on that. But also, I think personally, in terms of the nakedness of the body and the head being covered, is it's kind of almost like the cliche of the artist. This idea of the artist as being someone who gives themselves in an entirety to the world, but kind of keeps an element of themselves hidden or secret from the public. And when I say artist, that could be from a writer or a comedian or a visual artist. I think all those kind of creative people have this tendency to give a lot and expose themselves to the world, but also have an element of their personality which they want to keep. So this is a work by the artist collective Fail from New York, and this work is actually a large-scale paste-up, which Fail are very well known for in New York and internationally. And so the work was actually made in their studio in New York in sections. I think it's about 23 sections, large-scale paintings, which they made on paper and then pasted directly to the building. And what the work depicts is almost like a 1950s style cliche of a Native American Indian kind of cutting through lots of different styles of fonts and texts. And if you look closely at the text, you might recognise some various corporate brands or logos and so forth, which the Indian is cutting through. And the artist said to me that they almost saw the image of the Indian as representing them as artists, kind of cutting through the language of advertising and kind of flood of images that we are exposed to every day. And another maybe interesting thing about the work and the style of this work is it very much references the kind of the pop art of Roy Lichtenstein, and also the Nouveau Realists, who were a French group of artists who were mainly prominent in the 1950s. So here we have the work of Nunca, who's a young artist from Sao Paulo in Brazil. The work represents a native Brazilian Indian that Nunca is very much interested in these kind of tribespeople from Brazil and kind of putting them into a contemporary context. And he's interested in the idea that in a way, the modern world is kind of full of savages and cannibals, but they operate in different ways than maybe previously they did. In terms of style, the work has lots of kind of lines drawn over it, kind of cross-hatching, and that references the wood carvings and engravings of the the early conquerors that first came to Brazil, and that was a kind of style of art they brought with them. The work is almost a bit of a joke in a way, or a bit of a joke on the actual context of the street art exhibition. The idea of these kind of wild, savage-like, outsider-ish street artists, being exhibited at the one of the most establishment museums, bastions of polite society in the world. It's a kind of so many contradictions, and I think Nunca's work really comments on that very closely in terms of this wild savage drinking this cup of tea in a very polite and dainty way, after he's perhaps just eaten one of the passers-by of Tate Modern, who knows, but the character is certainly a cannibal with all his shrunken heads round his neck and the disembodied hand just under the savage's foot. So I think it's quite a funny gesture to have made, let's say. Another interesting thing to point out about this work, just a small detail, is on the top right hand corner you can just see there's a little paint roller sticking out of the Indian's bag, and what that represents is in Brazilian street art these small paint rollers were a very big symbol of Brazilian street art, because before they worked with spray paint they often worked with latex household paint, and they would do it with these small rollers. So that's a big symbol of Brazilian Okay, here we have the work of Blue, who's an artist from Bologna in Italy. This work is clearly a depiction of a large head which has been sliced open to reveal the kind of inner workings and dark, mysterious thoughts that are going on inside this guy's head. One of the things I think that is really interesting about Blue's work, particularly in relation to the other pieces that were on the front of the Tate, is Blue's work, I think, is the only piece you couldn't really look at and kind of consume in one go. You kind of had to go and look at it closely and look at the details almost separately. It kind of played a trick in that way, that it was, at one level it's quite graphic from a distance and quite simplistic and cartoony, but also to really fully kind of see the piece you had to go close and look at all the crazy details. In terms of the piece being made, it was quite fascinating to watch Blue work, because he works in this quite unique way of only having a very simple outline sketch to paint from, and then doing all the details, all these mad kind of apocalyptic nuclear meltdown crazy scenario that's going on inside the guy's head. All that just came straight out of Blue's imagination as he was working. So no one really knew what he was going to paint, and I don't even think Blue knew what he was going to paint until the very moment he was doing it. So that was really kind of great and interesting to see. In terms of materials, the work is also unique in terms of the other works it relates to on the front of the building, in that it's the only work which is just made with regular household paint. And what was great was that Blue's kind of material list for the project was so simple. He basically asked for, a few gallons of white paint, some red and some black. It was so simple, and so I think what he achieved with such simple means was super impressive. And I think Blue's work really kind of celebrates drawing and the skill of drawing more than any other work in the show.